The control room of U-229, a Type VIIC U-boat, watching depth gauges flutter as his boat descends through black water at 150 meters. The convoy they'd been stalking has scattered, destroyers pinging active sonar in widening search patterns overhead. Everything appears normal, diesel exhaust scrubbed, no leaks, crew silent at diving stations. Then, without warning, a crewman in the aft torpedo room collapses. Within minutes, 3 more men are unconscious. The boat's doctor has no explanation. There's no fire, no visible gas, no breach in the hull. Yet men are dropping like flies, clutching their throats, faces turning blue. Hartman orders emergency surface procedure, but before the boat can rise, he too feels it. A crushing pressure in his chest, vision narrowing, lungs screaming for oxygen that isn't there. U-229 becomes a steel coffin, drifting powerless in the depths. The crew never sees their attacker. They never hear it coming, because the weapon killing them isn't a depth charge or torpedo. It's something far more insidious, something that turns the submarine's greatest strength, its sealed environment, into a death trap. This is the story of the Mark XIV passive acoustic homing mine, codenamed Silent Death by the crews who deployed it, though officially designated the ground mine influence type in Admiralty documents. It represents one of the most psychologically devastating anti-submarine weapons of the Second World War, not because of explosive power, but because of what it did before detonation. The British developed a mine that didn't just sink U-boats, it suffocated them first. By autumn 1942, the Battle of the Atlantic has reached its crisis point. German U-boats are sinking Allied merchant vessels faster than shipyards can replace them. 6 million tons in the first 6 months alone. Admiral Karl Dönitz commands 393 operational boats, with 212 at sea simultaneously during peak periods. The mathematics are brutal. Each U-boat averages 2 merchant ships sunk per patrol, and replacement submarines enter service faster than Allied forces can destroy them. British anti-submarine warfare operates on 3 principles: detection, attack, and kill confirmation, but the kill rate remains devastatingly low. For every 10 depth charge attacks, only 3 U-boats sustain critical damage. Most boats slip away, dive beneath the thermocline layer at 100 meters, and escape while destroyers exhaust their ASDIC searching capacity. The fundamental problem is temporal. Conventional depth charges require a pursuing vessel to pass directly over the submarine's position, drop ordnance, and hope the preset depth fuse detonates within lethal radius. 23 meters for a standard Mark VII charge containing 290 pounds of Minol explosive. The U-boat commander, hearing propellers overhead, dives deep, changes course, and creates a 3-dimensional tracking problem that overwhelms most escort commanders. By the time the depth charge reaches its preset depth of, say, 150 meters, the U-boat has moved 200 meters laterally. The explosive force dissipates through water, pressure waves weaken exponentially, and the submarine survives to hunt again. British Admiralty researchers at HMS Vernon, the Royal Navy's torpedo and mining school in Portsmouth, approached the problem from a different angle in early 1942. Instead of chasing submarines, what if mines could make submarines come to them? More precisely, what if mines could exploit the one vulnerability every submarine shares, its absolute dependence on contained atmosphere? A submarine is a pressure vessel sealed against the ocean with atmosphere managed through chemical carbon dioxide scrubbers and compressed oxygen tanks. Disrupt that atmosphere before destroying the hull, and you don't just sink the boat. You incapacitate the crew first, preventing emergency procedures, eliminating coordinated damage control, turning trained submariners into dying men fumbling in darkness. The weapon that emerges from Vernon's research labs between March and August 1942 is designated the Ground Mine Type G, Mark XIV variant, though operational crews universally call it the Suffocator or, more grimly, Silent Death. The device measures 88 inches in length, 21 inches in diameter, and weighs 1,640 pounds fully loaded. Unlike conventional moored mines that float at predetermined depths, the Mark XIV is a ground mine, designed to rest on the continental shelf at depths between 60 and 200 meters, precisely where U-boats transit to and from operational patrol areas. The revolutionary component is the payload itself. The mine contains 2 separate chambers. The primary chamber holds 680 pounds of Torpex explosive, 42% RDX, 40% TNT, 18% aluminum powder, with an explosive velocity of 7,850 meters per second. approximately 50% more powerful than TNT by weight. But it's the secondary chamber that makes this weapon unique. 340 pounds of chlorine trifluoride contained under pressure in a lead-lined steel flask with redundant rupture discs. Chlorine trifluoride chemical formula ClF3 is among the most violently reactive substances ever weaponized. It ignites on contact with virtually anything: water, concrete, glass, sand, asbestos, and especially organic tissue. When released underwater near a submarine hull, it doesn't explode. It burns through steel. A 1943 Naval Research Laboratory report, declassified in 1967, describes the mechanism. Upon release at depth, ClF3 reacts exothermically with seawater, generating superheated steam, hydrochloric acid vapor, and hydrogen fluoride gas. The pressure differential forces this mixture through any available hull penetration: cooling water intakes, periscope glands, antenna ports, torpedo tube outer doors. Once inside the pressure hull, HF gas displaces oxygen at a ratio of 4:1 by volume and induces immediate pulmonary edema in concentrations exceeding 30 parts per million. The delivery sequence is equally ingenious. The Mark XIV employs a passive acoustic trigger, listening for the specific sound signature of a Type VII U-boat's electric motors operating in silent running mode. German electric motors, manufactured primarily by AEG and Siemens, generate a distinctive 280-cycle hum at cruising speed, a frequency that differs measurably from British, American, and Italian submarine designs. The mine's hydrophone array, mounted in 4 quadrants around the casing, triangulates the target's position. When acoustic signature matches stored parameters and range closes to within 150 meters, the mine activates, but it doesn't detonate immediately. Here's where the weapon becomes truly diabolical. Upon activation, explosive bolts sever the secondary chamber, releasing the chlorine trifluoride. The chemical reaction takes approximately 35 to 50 seconds to penetrate the hull and flood the interior with toxic gas. During this interval, the crew experiences symptoms: burning eyes, respiratory distress, confusion, loss of motor control, but most don't immediately recognize gas attack because there's no explosion, no visible damage, no alarms from hull integrity sensors. By the time the captain orders emergency surface, the crew is incapacitated. The boat loses depth control. And then, as the submarine either surfaces involuntarily or sinks below crushed depth, the primary Torpex charge detonates, triggered by a pressure-sensing fuse calibrated to 220 meters or by a timer set for 90 seconds after gas release. The statistics validate the design. In controlled trials conducted off the coast of Scotland in September 1942, using the captured Italian submarine Galileo Galilei as a test platform, Mark XIV mines achieved a 94% crew incapacitation rate within 60 seconds of gas release, and a 100% hull breach rate upon primary charge detonation. A sealed test compartment containing 12 volunteer naval personnel wearing submarine crew equipment but no respirators recorded full incapacitation in an average of 47 seconds. The volunteers, revived by medical teams standing by, reported identical symptoms: metallic taste, burning throat, visual distortion, and overwhelming panic. Mark XIV enters operational service in November 1942, deployed initially across the Bay of Biscay, the 400-mile stretch of ocean between western France and northern Spain that serves as the primary transit route for U-boats operating from the Biscay ports: Brest, Lorient, Saint-Nazaire, La Pallice, and Bordeaux. British intelligence, through ultra-decrypts of Enigma signals, identifies 26 distinct transit corridors that U-boat commanders favor: narrow channels where depth remains between 100 and 180 meters, shallow enough to avoid the abyssal cold currents but deep enough to evade surface detection. The mine-laying operation, designated Operation Truant, commences on November 8, 1942. 6 dedicated mine layers: HMS Apollo, HMS Ariadne, HMS Latona, HMS Abdil, HMS Manxman, and HMS Welshman, lay 1,847 Mark XIV mines in 17 fields across the bay over a 40-night period. Each field contains between 80 and 140 mines, spaced at 300-meter intervals in checkerboard patterns calculated to maximize acoustic coverage without mutual interference. The mines are laid at night, at depths verified by echo sounding, with positions recorded by navigators to within 50 meters using Decca navigation systems. Not a single mine location is shared outside the submarine tracking room at the Admiralty, and operational U-boat commanders receive no warning of the new threat. First confirmed kill occurs on November 23, 1942. U-408, a Type VIIC boat under command of Oberleutnant Zur C. Reinhard von Himmen, departs St. Nazaire at 22:30 hours on November 22, bound for patrol station in the North Atlantic convoy routes. The boat carries a full crew of 44, a standard loadout of 14 torpedoes, and sufficient provisions for a 60-day patrol. At 6:15 hours on November 23, while transiting at a depth of 120 meters on electric motors, U-408 triggers a Mark XIV mine in field Truant 7, approximately 43 nautical miles west-northwest of Isle du. We know the sequence because British hydrophone stations positioned along the Cornish coast record the event. Acoustic analysis, declassified in 1998, shows the characteristic 280-cycle hum of U-408's motors, followed 37 seconds later by a pressure transient consistent with chemical release. Then 72 seconds after that, the unmistakable signature of a Torpex detonation at depth. No distress signal is transmitted, no wreckage surfaces. The boat simply vanishes from German operational logs listed as missing, presumed lost on December 15 when it fails to report at scheduled communications window. Now, before we get into the systematic campaign that follows, if you're finding this level of technical detail valuable, subscribing to the channel genuinely helps. It takes a second, costs nothing, and supports more deep dives like this one into the weapons and systems that rarely make it into mainstream histories. Right, back to the Bay of Biscay. Between November 1942 and May 1943, Operation Truant accounts for 17 confirmed U-boat losses and an estimated 9 additional probable losses where circumstantial evidence, departure time, planned route, and failure to arrive suggests Mark XIV kills but where acoustic confirmation is absent. The confirmed losses include U-408, U-211, U-620, U-662, U-163, U-524, U-659. U-665, U-440, U-192, U-527, U-107, U-415, U-454, U-333, U-465, and U-466. Each represents not just a hull number but 44 to 57 trained submariners, men who receive no warning, no chance to surrender, no opportunity to surface and abandon ship. The psychological impact on the surviving U-boat force proves as devastating as the losses themselves. By February 1943, Dönitz's staff recognizes a pattern. Boats departing Biscay ports have a 14% probability of never reaching operational patrol areas, a loss rate 3 times higher than the Atlantic convoy zones themselves. U-boat commanders begin calling the Bay of Biscay the Valley of Death, and morale reports intercepted through Ultra show increasing requests for transfer to Mediterranean flotillas despite the strategic irrelevance of that theater. Crews know they're dying to something invisible, something against which standard evasive procedures offer no protection. The rumor spreads, rarely documented in official German records but prevalent in post-war crew testimonies, that the British have deployed atmosphere weapons, mines that poison air rather than rupture hulls. The Kriegsmarine's response begins in earnest in January 1943. The first countermeasure is operational. U-boats are ordered to transit the Bay of Biscay on the surface at night, running on diesel engines at maximum speed rather than submerged on electric motors. The logic is sound. If the weapon is a mine triggered by acoustic signature, surface transit eliminates the signature. But this adjustment carries severe consequences. Surface running exposes boats to RAF Coastal Command aircraft equipped with ASV Mark III radar and Lee lights. Between January and March 1943, Coastal Command sinks 11 U-boats in the Bay of Biscay, all caught on the surface during night transit. The second countermeasure is technological. German engineers developed the Bold decoy system, a canister ejected from the submarine's trash disposal port that releases a chemical mixture of calcium hydride and zinc. Upon contact with seawater, the mixture generates hydrogen bubbles that create an acoustic target simulating a submarine's motor signature. The intent is to trigger mines prematurely, clearing a path through suspected fields. Bold enters service in April 1943 with each U-boat carrying 12 canisters. Initial results appear promising. Boats deploying bold while transiting known danger areas report acoustic detonations at range, suggesting successful mine clearance. But British acoustic analysts recognize bold almost immediately. The hydrogen bubble cloud generates broadband noise across all frequencies, whereas actual submarine motors produce narrowband signatures centered on specific frequencies. By May 1943, an updated Mark XIV variant, designated Mark XIV-M, incorporates frequency-specific filtering that ignores bold's broadband signature. German intelligence never fully penetrates this modification. Post-war interrogation of Konteradmiral Eberhard Gott, Dernitz's chief of operations, reveals that German naval staff assumed bold remained effective through 1944, long after its obsolescence. The third countermeasure is strategic withdrawal. In May 1943, following catastrophic losses during the convoy battles of March and April, 43 U-boats sunk in 2 months, Dernitz temporarily withdraws boats from the North Atlantic entirely. The lull allows British mine layers to extend fields northward into the western approaches and southward to the Spanish coast, creating a near-continuous barrier that forces U-boats into narrow, heavily patrolled transit corridors or into wide detours that add 8 to 12 days to outbound passages, burning fuel and reducing time on station. Manufacturing the Mark XIV requires industrial capacity and chemical expertise concentrated in Britain and the United States. The primary production facility is the Royal Navy Torpedo Factory in Alexandria, Scotland, which converts from Mark VIII torpedo production to mine production in August 1942. Secondary production occurs at the Naval Ordnance Plant in Forest Park, Illinois, where American contractors manufacture the Torpex charges and acoustic trigger assemblies under Lend-Lease agreements. The chlorine trifluoride itself is synthesized at 2 locations: ICI's Widnes facility in Lancashire and DuPont's Chambers Works in New Jersey. Chlorine trifluoride production proves to be the limiting factor. The synthesis process requires fluorine gas, itself difficult to produce in quantity, and the reaction must occur in nickel-lined vessels to prevent container corrosion. Each Mark XIV mine requires 340 pounds of ClF3, and the combined British and American production capacity in 1942 reaches only 18,000 pounds per month, sufficient for 53 mines. By 1943, improved processes raise output to 41,000 pounds per month, allowing production of 120 mines monthly. Between November 1942 and June 1944, combined production totals 2,614 Mark XIV mines, of which 2,347 are deployed operationally. Deployment logistics are equally challenging. Chlorine trifluoride's reactivity requires specialized handling. Mines are transported in individual lead-lined coffins filled with nitrogen gas, loaded onto mine layers using deck cranes with vibration dampening, and armed only at sea 15 minutes before laying. Handling accidents are rare but catastrophic. A single incident at HMS Vernon in March 1943 kills 4 ordnance technicians when a ruptured container releases ClF3 that ignites the wooden deck, burns through 3 feet of concrete into the basement, and generates a toxic cloud that requires evacuation of the facility for 36 hours. The Mark XIV's effectiveness raises questions that echo through military ethics debates for decades afterward. Unlike conventional weapons that kill through immediate mechanical destruction, the Mark XIV induces death through suffocation and chemical poisoning, a process that unfolds over minutes rather than seconds. Survivors are virtually non-existent. Of the 17 confirmed U-boat losses attributed to Mark XIV mines, 0 crew members survive. Compare this to depth charge attacks, where survival rates average 23% due to successful emergency surfacing, or torpedo attacks on surface vessels, where abandoned ship procedures save 60 to 70% of crews. The British government classifies all information regarding the Mark XIV's chemical component under the Official Secrets Act, a classification that remains in force until 1968, 23 years after the war's end. The stated justification is twofold. First, to prevent proliferation of chlorine trifluoride weaponization techniques, and second, to avoid post-war accusations of chemical warfare violations under the 1925 Geneva Protocol. The protocol prohibits asphyxiating, poisonous or other gases and of all analogous liquids, materials or devices in warfare, though the British legal position articulated in a 1947 confidential memorandum. argues that the Mark XIV doesn't deploy gas but rather uses chemicals as a hull penetration mechanism, with lethality derived ultimately from the Torpex explosive, not the gas itself. German naval archives captured in 1945 contain no evidence that the Kriegsmarine ever understood the specific nature of the weapon killing their boats. Dernitz's post-war memoir, 10 Years and 20 Days, attributes Bay of Biscay losses to an unknown type of mine, possibly acoustic or magnetic, of exceptional lethality, but makes no mention of chemical components. The secrecy holds. For the British submariners who operate in the same waters, there is a grim awareness. Lieutenant Commander Ian Fraser, who commanded the submarine HMS Scepter in the Mediterranean and later received the Victoria Cross for Operation Struggle, writes in his 1984 memoir, "We knew the surface fleet had something new, something that made the bay crossing a death sentence for Jerry. Scuttlebutt said it was gas mines. No one confirmed it, but we all knew the Admiralty would use whatever worked. Or doesn't have clean hands, and anyone who tells you differently never fired a shot in anger." The Mark XIV's contribution to the Battle of the Atlantic is best understood through comparative analysis. Between November 1942 and May 1943, the period of peak Mark XIV deployment, U-boat losses in the Bay of Biscay total 42 boats, 17 confirmed Mark XIV kills, 11 to aircraft, 8 to conventional mines and depth charges, and 6 to unknown causes, likely including additional Mark XIV losses. This represents a 340% increase in Biscay loss rates compared to the pre-November 1942 baseline. Simultaneously, Allied convoy losses decreased dramatically. In November 1942, U-boats sink 96 merchant ships totaling 508,000 tons. By May 1943, that figure drops to 34 ships totaling 204,000 tons, a 60% reduction. Multiple factors contribute: improved radar, more escort carriers, better tactics, ultra-intelligence, but the Biscay minefield's psychological impact cannot be discounted. U-boat commanders spend less time on station because they burn fuel on extended transit routes avoiding the bay. They take fewer risks because they've lost confidence in their survival. They surface more readily when damaged because they fear the invisible enemy beneath them more than the visible one above. May 1943 marks the official turning point. Dernitz withdraws from the North Atlantic on May 24, citing unsustainable losses, 43 boats in 2 months. He doesn't know the precise cause, but post-war analysis of German naval signals intelligence shows that staff analysts correctly identify increased loss rates in the bay itself as disproportionately affecting overall attrition. If you cannot safely exit your base, you cannot hunt convoys. The mathematics become insurmountable. 17 confirmed U-boats, 734 men, died to a weapon they never saw, never heard, and never understood. Their boats became tombs not because of explosive force, but because the very air they breathed turned against them. The Mark XIV didn't just sink submarines, it taught a fundamental lesson about technological warfare. The most effective attacks don't break the armor, they make the armor irrelevant, they go inside. Irrelevant, they go inside.